I sat at our family's elaborately set dining table, watching the golden candlelight flicker across the fine china that had belonged to Grandmother Mildred. The house smelled of roasted turkey and pine from the Christmas tree, but underneath it all, I could sense something rotten. My brother Marcus leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk spreading across his face as he gestured toward my place setting. "Your plate's outside with the dogs," he announced loudly, his voice dripping with mock authority. The entire room fell silent. Mom, Dad, my sister-in-law Brenda, and cousin Tyler all stared at their hands, refusing to meet my eyes. Without a word, I reached into my purse, pulled out a wrapped gift box, and placed it deliberately on the table. Then I looked around at their suddenly pale faces and whispered, "Check under your plates." The silence stretched across the room like a thick fog. But inside my head, everything was crystal clear. I knew exactly why I had come to this dinner tonight, despite every instinct telling me to stay away. 3 weeks ago, I had discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. It started when I volunteered to clean out Grandmother Mildred's house in Boulder after her funeral. While everyone else made excuses about being too busy or too emotional, I spent my weekends sorting through her belongings. She had been the only family member who truly understood me, who listened without judgment, who made me feel valued. The least I could do was handle her affairs with the care she deserved. On a cold Saturday morning in early December, I was organizing her bedroom dresser when my fingers found something unusual. Taped to the back of the bottom drawer was a small brass key. My heart started pounding as I examined it more closely. It looked like a safety deposit box key, but Grandmother had never mentioned having one. The next Monday, I visited every bank in Boulder until I found the right one. First National Bank confirmed that Mildred Henderson maintained box number 214. When I provided the key and death certificate, the banker led me to a small, windowless room where I could examine the contents privately. Inside the metal box, I found documents that made my stomach drop. Bank statements dating back 5 years showed regular, unauthorized withdrawals. $25,000 here, $15,000 there, sometimes as much as $40,000 in a single month. The withdrawals had started small and grown larger over time, like someone had gained confidence in their ability to steal without detection. But what shocked me most were Grandmother's handwritten notes, paper-clipped to each statement. In her careful cursive, she had written things like, "I never authorized this transfer, and why won't Robert explain these charges? And Marcus says he's helping with my finances, but these numbers don't make sense." My hands shook as I calculated the total. Over 5 years, someone had stolen more than $200,000 from a woman who trusted them completely. The final note, dated just 2 months before her death, broke my heart. "I'm scared to ask questions anymore. They get so angry when I bring up the money. Maybe I'm just confused. Maybe I should stop worrying about it." I photocopied everything and locked the originals back in the safety deposit box. Then I drove straight to the office of Patricia Holbrook, a private investigator I found online. Patricia had 20 years of experience with financial fraud cases, and her no-nonsense approach immediately put me at ease. "Family theft is more common than people think," she told me during our first meeting. "Elderly victims often blame themselves or worry about causing family drama. The perpetrators count on that shame and confusion." Over the following weeks, Patricia helped me trace the money. The unauthorized withdrawals had been transferred to accounts belonging to Marcus, my parents, Robert and Janet, cousin Tyler, and even my sister-in-law, Brenda. They had divided the stolen money among themselves like shares in some twisted family business. The investigation revealed forged power of attorney documents, falsified medical reports claiming Grandmother was mentally incompetent, and fabricated nursing home bills for care she never received. Tyler, who worked as an accountant, had used his professional letterhead to create legitimate-looking financial statements that hid the theft. As I learned more details, the emotional pain cut deeper than the financial crimes. While they were stealing her life savings, Grandmother had been living on Social Security checks and rationing her medications because she thought she couldn't afford them. She had died believing she was a burden on the family, never knowing that the money she worried about losing had actually been stolen by the people she loved most. That's when I decided to confront them all at Christmas dinner. They expected me to be the same, naive, accommodating Suzette who always avoided conflict. They had no idea I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Dad was the first to crack. Robert Henderson had always prided himself on being the family patriarch, but now his face had turned the color of wet concrete. He pushed back from the table so abruptly that his chair screeched against the hardwood floor. "I'm not feeling well," he announced, clutching his chest dramatically. "I think I need to lie down," but I wasn't about to let him escape that easily. "Sit down, Dad," I said calmly. "You're going to want to hear this." Mom jumped up and started frantically collecting dirty appetizer plates that didn't need collecting. Janet had always used busy work to avoid uncomfortable conversations, but tonight her nervous energy felt different, more desperate. She wouldn't look at me directly, and her hands trembled as she stacked the dishes. "What's in the box, Suzette?" Marcus demanded, his earlier smugness replaced by something harder. He leaned forward aggressively, and I could see a vein pulsing in his forehead. "What kind of game are you playing?" Brenda, who usually dominated family conversations with stories about her yoga classes and organic meal plans, had gone completely silent. She sat frozen with a piece of dinner roll halfway to her mouth, staring at the gift box like it might explode. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. But it was Tyler who gave away the most. My cousin had always been the steady, reliable one, the accountant who helped everyone with their taxes and investment advice. Now he was sweating through his expensive dress shirt, and his usually steady hands were shaking as he reached for his wine glass. "Whatever you think you know," Tyler said carefully. "There's probably a reasonable explanation. Family finances can be complicated." I smiled at him. "Oh, Tyler, there's definitely going to be an explanation. We're all going to sit here together, and everyone is going to open their presents. Then we're going to have a nice, long conversation about grandmother's finances." "This is ridiculous," Marcus snarled, starting to stand up. "I don't have to listen to this crazy nonsense from—" He never finished the sentence because Mrs. Patterson chose that exact moment to knock on the front door. Eleanor Patterson was the neighborhood's unofficial welcome wagon, a 70-year-old retired teacher who brought cookies to new families and organized the annual block party. She also had perfect timing. "Yoo-hoo, Janet!" Mrs. Patterson called through the screen door. "I brought some of my famous snickerdoodles for dessert." Mom's face went white as she realized she had to answer the door and pretend everything was normal. The last thing our family needed was Mrs. Patterson witnessing a scene and spreading gossip throughout the neighborhood. "Just a minute, Eleanor," Mom called back, her voice artificially bright. She shot a warning look around the table. "Everyone needs to calm down right now. We have company." This was perfect. I had hoped for a moment like this, where family pride would force them to sit still and listen instead of storming out. Mrs. Patterson's presence meant they had to maintain the facade of a loving family gathering. "That's right," I said sweetly as Mom went to greet our neighbor. "We wouldn't want Mrs. Patterson to think anything was wrong. So everyone just sit tight and wait for Mom to come back. Then we're all going to open our gifts together." Marcus's jaw clenched, but he sat back down. Tyler loosened his tie and took a large gulp of wine. Brenda finally put down the dinner roll and clasped her hands in her lap to stop them from shaking. I could hear Mom and Mrs. Patterson chatting by the front door about the weather and holiday plans, their voices carrying the false cheer that comes with small talk. But underneath the pleasantries, I could feel the tension in our dining room building like pressure in a steam engine. When Mom returned to the table 5 minutes later, she was carrying a plate of cookies and wearing a strained smile. "Eleanor says hello to everyone," she announced. "She's so sorry she can't stay longer, but she's expecting her grandchildren tonight." "How nice," I said. "Now, where were we?" "Oh yes. I was telling everyone about the power of attorney documents, and the bank transfers, and Tyler's creative accounting work." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dad's fake illness had apparently been cured by adrenaline, because he was sitting up straight and staring at me with a mixture of fear and fury. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, Dad, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've had 3 weeks to research everything very thoroughly. Patricia Holbrook is an excellent private investigator, very detail-oriented." The mention of a private investigator made Tyler's face go completely pale. As an accountant, he understood better than the others what kind of legal trouble they were facing. "Now," I continued, reaching for the gift box, "let's see what presents I brought for everyone." The manila envelopes under each plate contained photocopies of documents that told the story of 5 years of systematic theft. As my family members reluctantly lifted their plates, I watched their expressions change from confusion to recognition to absolute terror. Marcus found copies of forged power of attorney forms with his signature authorizing him to make financial decisions for grandmother. The documents claimed she had dementia and was unable to manage her own affairs, despite the fact that she had been mentally sharp until the day she died. "This is fake," Marcus said, but his voice cracked. "I never signed anything like this." "Really?" I replied, pulling out my phone. "Would you like me to show everyone the video?" Tyler's envelope contained financial statements from his accounting firm that showed fabricated medical expenses and nursing home costs. The letterhead made everything look official and legitimate, even though grandmother had never been in a nursing home. "Suzette, you have to understand," Tyler stammered. "The family was going through a difficult time financially. We thought we could borrow the money temporarily and pay it back before she noticed." "Borrow?" I asked. "From someone you claimed was mentally incompetent? Without her knowledge or permission?" "That's not borrowing, Tyler. That's theft." Dad's documents showed bank transfer authorizations moving grandmother's money from her Colorado accounts to personal accounts in 3 different states. His signature appeared on dozens of transfers, each one draining more of her life savings. "She wanted us to have this money," Dad said desperately. "She always said the family should stick together and help each other." "Did she say that before or after you forged documents claiming she had dementia?" I asked. Mom's envelope revealed nursing home contracts and medical bills for services grandmother never received. The amounts were staggering, sometimes $8,000 per month for specialized memory care. "We were trying to get her the best possible care," Mom whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. "What care?" I demanded. "She lived alone in her house until the day she died. She was rationing her heart medication because she thought she couldn't afford it while you were stealing thousands of dollars every month." Brenda's documents were perhaps the most heartbreaking. Medical records with her forged signature claimed that grandmother was having severe cognitive episodes and violent outbursts that required sedation. These fake reports had been used to justify the power of attorney and financial guardianship. "I never wrote these reports," Brenda said, her voice barely audible. "I'm not even a medical professional." "But you did sign them," I pointed out. "Your signature is right there next to your nursing license number. You used your credentials to legitimize medical fraud." The dining room had become completely silent except for the ticking of grandmother's antique mantel clock. Everyone stared at the documents spread across the table, the evidence of their crimes laid out like a feast of guilt and shame. The total amount stolen over 5 years was $237,412, I announced. "That includes the original theft, plus interest and fees." "Tyler, since you're an accountant, would you like to check my math?" Tyler shook his head miserably. "Suzette, we never meant for it to go this far. It started as a small loan when Marcus was having financial problems. We thought we could pay it back quickly." "What financial problems were those?" I asked, though Patricia's investigation had already given me the answer. The room fell silent again. Marcus glared at Tyler, clearly warning him not to say more. "Marcus lost his job 18 months ago, Tyler finally admitted. He was behind on his mortgage and his car payments. The gambling debts were getting out of control, and some very dangerous people were making threats." "What gambling debts?" Mom asked, looking shocked. This was apparently news to her. $60,000, Tyler said quietly. He owed $60,000 to people who don't accept late payments. Marcus slammed his fist on the table, making all the wine glasses jump. "Shut up, Tyler. You don't know what you're talking about." But Tyler was in full confession mode now, the pressure of keeping secrets finally overwhelming his loyalty to the family. "They threatened to hurt Brenda and the kids if he didn't pay up," he continued. "That's when he came to us with the power of attorney idea. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he could get back on his feet." "So you decided to steal from a 92-year-old woman to pay gambling debts?" I asked. "It wasn't supposed to be stealing," Dad said defensively. "We thought she would understand if we explained the situation." "Then why didn't you explain it to her?" No one had an answer for that question. We all knew why they hadn't asked permission. Grandmother would have said no, and she would have been right to say no. The weight of their crimes was finally sinking in, and I could see the panic spreading across their faces as they realized the legal implications of what they had done. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was federal criminal fraud. I let the silence stretch for a full minute before delivering the news that would change everything. I need to tell you all something important, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. 3 days ago, I contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. Agent Catherine Rodriguez is now handling grandmother's case as part of a federal wire fraud investigation. The color drained from every face around the table. Tyler made a choking sound and reached for his water glass with trembling hands. You see, I continued, when money is stolen from bank accounts in Colorado and transferred to accounts in Arizona, Nevada, and California, it becomes interstate wire fraud. That's a federal crime with mandatory minimum sentences of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. You called the FBI on your own family? Mom whispered, looking at me like I was a stranger. I called the FBI on criminals who happened to be related to me, I corrected. There's a difference. Marcus exploded out of his chair, lunging across the table toward me. You little bitch! Do you have any idea what you've done? Dad grabbed Marcus's arm before he could reach me, but the violence in his eyes was unmistakable. This was the brother who had terrorized me throughout childhood, who had always used intimidation and physical threats to get his way. But I wasn't a scared little girl anymore. Sit down, Marcus, I said calmly. Unless you want to add assault charges to your federal fraud case. Tyler was hyperventilating now, loosening his tie completely and fanning himself with one of the legal documents. My firm, he gasped. My CPA license. They'll revoke everything. I'll never work again. You should have thought about that before you used your professional credentials to commit fraud, I replied. Brenda spoke for the first time since the documents had been revealed. I didn't want to do any of this, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus threatened to leave me and the kids with nothing if I didn't cooperate. He said I'd be homeless without him. So instead of getting a divorce lawyer, you decided to forge medical documents and steal from an elderly woman? I asked. I was scared, Brenda sobbed. You don't understand what he's like when he gets angry. What those gambling people were threatening to do to us. Mom finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. This is all Robert's fault. The power of attorney was his idea. He said we deserved that money, that we were the ones taking care of Mother while you lived your selfish life in Phoenix. My selfish life? I couldn't help laughing bitterly. I was the only one who visited her regularly. I was the only one who noticed when she started rationing her medications. I was the only one who cared enough to investigate when her behavior started changing. She was getting old and confused, Dad said defensively. We were trying to protect her from making poor financial decisions. By stealing her money and lying about her mental state, my phone rang, interrupting the conversation. The caller ID showed David Chambers, the family's longtime attorney. I answered on speakerphone. Suzette? This is David. I just received a very disturbing call from the FBI. Agent Rodriguez says you've made serious allegations against your family regarding financial fraud. I need to speak with everyone immediately. Hello, David, I said pleasantly. Actually, everyone's here right now. We're having a lovely Christmas dinner discussion about federal wire fraud charges. This is not a joking matter, David said sternly. If these allegations are true, everyone needs legal representation immediately. No one should say another word without an attorney present. Too late for that advice, I said. I've been legally recording this entire conversation. Colorado is a one-party consent state, so everything said tonight is admissible in federal court. The phone went silent. Then David's voice came back, tight with professional concern. Suzette, I'm advising everyone at that table to stop talking immediately and contact separate attorneys. This conversation needs to end right now. Oh, but David, I said sweetly. We're just getting to the interesting part. I was about to explain how the gambling debts and threats from dangerous creditors make this a racketeering case as well as wire fraud. Tyler made a sound like he was going to be sick. Marcus had gone completely white, finally understanding that his threats and intimidation tactics had no power in a federal courtroom. The beautiful thing about federal charges, I continued, is that they don't plea bargain the way state courts do. The sentencing guidelines are very clear. First-time offenders typically serve at least 48 months for wire fraud. Repeat offenders or cases involving elderly victims can get up to 20 years. Suzette, please, Mom begged. We're family. Can't we work this out privately? I looked around the table at these people who had claimed to love grandmother while systematically robbing her. They had shown no mercy when she was alive and vulnerable. Now they wanted mercy for themselves. Actually, I said, I do have a proposal for how we might resolve this situation. But first, I think we need to hear the rest of Tyler's confession about the gambling creditors and their threats. The FBI is going to want those details for the racketeering investigation. Tyler was the first to break completely. The weight of potential federal charges and the loss of his professional license had shattered his composure entirely. Sweat was pouring down his face as he loosened his collar and looked around the table desperately. Please, Suzette, he begged. I have 2 kids in college. My daughter Emma is pre-med at Northwestern. My son Jake just started his engineering program at Colorado State. If I go to federal prison, their entire futures are ruined. You should have considered that before you used your CPA credentials to commit fraud, I replied. But since you seem ready to tell the truth, why don't you explain to everyone how this really started? Tyler glanced nervously at Marcus, who was glaring at him with undisguised fury. But facing federal prison had apparently given Tyler the courage to defy his cousin. The gambling debts were worse than I said, Tyler admitted. Marcus didn't just owe $60,000. He owed that much to 3 different groups: underground poker games, sports betting, casino markers he couldn't cover. The total was over $180,000. $180,000? Mom gasped, looking at Marcus in shock. The people he owed money to weren't just threatening him, Tyler continued, his voice gaining strength as he unburdened himself. They sent photos of our houses, pictures of Brenda leaving work, images of my kids walking to class. They said the whole family would pay for Marcus's debts if he didn't come up with the money. Brenda was sobbing openly now. That's when Marcus came home and said we had to help him, or people would get hurt. He showed me pictures of what they did to another debtor's wife. I was terrified. So, instead of going to the police about threats and extortion, you decided to steal from grandmother? I asked. Marcus said it would only be temporary, Dad interjected. He promised he'd pay back every penny once he got his gambling under control and found steady work. But he never got his gambling under control, did he? I pressed. Tyler shook his head miserably. He kept betting with grandmother's money, thinking he could win enough to pay back the creditors and replace what we'd stolen. But he just lost more and more. By the end, we'd taken almost everything she had. Marcus finally exploded. Shut your mouth, Tyler. You're making it sound like this was all my fault. Wasn't it? Brenda demanded, turning on her husband with years of suppressed anger. You're the one with the gambling addiction. You're the one who brought dangerous criminals into our lives. You're the one who forced us all to become criminals. I never forced anyone to do anything, Marcus snarled back. You all chose to help because you knew it was the smart thing to do. You all benefited from that money. Benefited? Tyler laughed bitterly. I used my share to pay for security systems and bodyguards because I was terrified those criminals would come after my family. That's not benefiting. Marcus, that's surviving the nightmare you created. Mom had been sitting silently, but now she found her voice. I want everyone to know that I opposed this from the beginning. The forged power of attorney was Robert's idea. He said Mother was getting senile anyway and wouldn't notice small withdrawals. Small withdrawals? Dad's voice rose. You're the one who suggested we take more each month. You said we deserved that money for all the years we spent caring for her. I never said we should steal it, Mom shot back. I said she should give it to us willingly as inheritance gifts. You're the one who decided to forge documents instead of asking her honestly. Because she would have said no, Dad exploded. She always liked Suzette better than the rest of us. She would have given everything to her precious granddaughter and left the family with nothing. The room fell silent as that truth hung in the air. This wasn't just about Marcus's gambling debts or financial desperation. This was about jealousy and resentment that had been festering for years. So this was really about punishing grandmother for loving me, I said quietly. You couldn't stand that she treated me differently, so you decided to steal what you thought should be yours. Brenda was the only one brave enough to nod. Marcus was always bitter about how much attention she gave you. He said it wasn't fair that you got special treatment just because you visited her more often. Special treatment like love and respect? I asked. Things you could have earned by actually caring about her instead of seeing her as a bank account? Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward onto the floor. I'm done listening to this self-righteous lecture from someone who thinks she's better than the rest of us. He started walking toward the door, but I called after him. The FBI agent wants to ask you about Vincent Carlucci and Tommy Santos. Those were two of your creditors, weren't they? The ones who specialize in loan sharking and extortion? Marcus froze with his hand on the doorknob. The racketeering investigation is going to focus on how your gambling debts connected organized crime to financial fraud against an elderly victim, I continued. Agent Rodriguez is particularly interested in the photos and threats against family members. That's interstate criminal conspiracy. Marcus turned around slowly, and for the first time all evening, he looked genuinely frightened. How do you know those names? Patricia Holbrook is a very thorough investigator, I said. She traced your gambling activities, your creditors, and their criminal enterprises. The FBI is already building cases against Carlucci and Santos for racketeering and elder financial abuse. If I cooperate with their investigation, what happens to the federal charges against me? I smiled at him. That depends on how honest you're willing to be and how much help you can provide. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, I have something else to tell everyone. Tyler, who had been frantically taking notes on his phone, looked up hopefully. Are you saying there's a way to avoid federal prison? I'm saying there might be an alternative to federal prosecution, I replied. But it's going to require some very difficult choices from all of you. Just as I was about to explain my proposal, Mrs. Patterson knocked on the door again. This time she seemed more concerned than neighborly. Janet? I heard shouting from next door. Is everything all right over there? The timing was perfect. Marcus had been heading for the door anyway, and now he had to answer it while pretending everything was normal. I watched him struggle to compose himself, wiping sweat from his forehead and forcing a fake smile. Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson, he said through the screen door. Just some heated discussion about football scores. But Mrs. Patterson was a retired teacher with decades of experience reading people, and she clearly sensed something was wrong. Are you sure? I thought I heard someone mention the FBI. Marcus looked back at me desperately. He was trapped between maintaining family privacy and avoiding more suspicion from a potential witness. We were just watching a crime show on TV, I called out helpfully. You know how realistic those police dramas are these days. Mrs. Patterson still looked concerned, but she nodded slowly. Well, if you're sure everything's okay, I'll just head back home then. After Marcus closed the door and returned to the table, the dynamic in the room had shifted completely. The interruption had given everyone time to think about their situation, and the reality of federal investigation was sinking in. Now, I said, pulling out a folder from my purse. Before we discuss any alternatives to prosecution, I need to make something very clear. I've spent 3 weeks working with attorneys, financial experts, and law enforcement professionals to understand every aspect of this case. I opened the folder and spread out additional documents. This is a complete restitution plan that would compensate grandmother's estate for every penny stolen, plus interest, legal fees, and damages. Tyler leaned forward to examine the papers, his accounting training making him naturally curious about the financial details. The total amount required for full restitution is $253,917, I continued. That includes the original theft of $237,412, plus compound interest at the federal rate, attorney fees, and investigative costs. We don't have that kind of money, Dad said immediately. Actually, you do, I replied. Patricia's investigation identified assets purchased with grandmother's stolen money. Marcus bought a boat and a motorcycle. Tyler invested in stock options that have appreciated significantly. Mom and Dad made a down payment on their vacation timeshare in Scottsdale. Brenda used her share for cosmetic surgery and a luxury car lease. Each person looked increasingly uncomfortable as I listed their purchases. They had obviously forgotten that spending stolen money leaves a clear paper trail. Full restitution would require liquidating those assets and establishing payment plans for the remaining balances, I explained. Tyler would need to surrender approximately 40% of his retirement account. Mom and Dad would need to sell the timeshare and take out a home equity loan. Marcus would forfeit the boat, motorcycle, and his truck. That would leave us with nothing, Mom protested. Grandmother died with nothing because you stole everything she had, I replied. The choice is financial hardship or federal prison. Which would you prefer? My phone rang, showing a conference call from attorney James Morrison. I answered on speaker. Good evening, everyone, James said in his professional baritone voice. I've been working with Suzette to develop a comprehensive resolution that could satisfy the government's interest in this case while avoiding the need for federal prosecution. What kind of resolution? Tyler asked eagerly. Complete restitution, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and cooperation with the ongoing investigation into the criminal creditors who threatened your family, James explained. In exchange, the U.S. Attorney's Office would consider deferring prosecution pending successful completion of the restitution agreement. What does public acknowledgement mean? Dad asked suspiciously. A full confession published in the Boulder Daily Camera and posted on social media, I answered. You would acknowledge stealing from grandmother, explain how the scheme worked, and apologize to the community for your crimes. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. I'm not destroying my reputation for some plea deal. Your reputation is already destroyed, I pointed out. The FBI investigation is a matter of public record. The local newspaper will report on the case whether you cooperate or not. The difference is whether the headline reads, Family helps convict, organized crime figures, or family sentenced to federal prison for elder abuse. Brenda wiped her eyes and spoke quietly. What about protection from the people Marcus owed money to? If we cooperate with the FBI investigation, won't that put us in danger? Agent Rodriguez has discussed witness protection options for family members who provide substantial assistance, James replied. The Carlucci and Santos organizations are targets of a broader federal investigation. Your cooperation could be valuable. Tyler was frantically calculating numbers on his phone. If we agree to full restitution, how long would we have to complete the payments? 5 years, I answered. With regular progress reports to the Federal Probation Office and annual audits to ensure compliance. And if we refuse? Mom asked. Then Agent Rodriguez proceeds with federal charges against all participants, James said matter-of-factly. Based on the evidence Suzette has provided, conviction is virtually certain. Federal sentencing guidelines suggest 48 to 72 months for first-time offenders, longer for those with leadership roles in the conspiracy. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Tyler was the first to make his choice. I'll take the restitution deal, he said firmly. I can't risk prison time with 2 kids in college. I'll liquidate whatever assets are necessary and establish a payment plan for my portion. Brenda nodded tearfully. I want to cooperate too. I'm tired of living in fear of Marcus's creditors and federal investigators. If there's a way to make this right and protect my children, I'll do whatever it takes. Mom and Dad looked at each other for a long moment before Dad spoke. We'll need time to consider the financial implications, but avoiding federal prison is obviously preferable. All eyes turned to Marcus, who had been silent during the legal discussion. His jaw was clenched, and he was staring at the table with obvious fury. I'm not admitting to anything, he said finally. And I'm not paying back money that was rightfully ours anyway. Grandmother should have given us that inheritance years ago. Then you'll be facing federal charges alone, I said simply. Everyone else will receive consideration for cooperation, and you'll be prosecuted as the ringleader who corrupted his family and endangered children through your gambling addiction. Marcus stood up again, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. This whole family can go to hell. I'll take my chances with a jury. Before you leave, I said, there's one more thing you should know. Something that makes all of this even more pointless than you realize. Marcus paused at the door, suspicious but curious. Grandmother changed her will 6 months before she died. Patricia found the updated documents in her attorney's files. Even if you had never stolen a penny, you wouldn't have inherited anything anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. The bomb I had just dropped exploded across the room like a shockwave. Marcus slowly turned around, his face a mixture of disbelief and rage. What do you mean she changed her will? He demanded. I reached into my folder and pulled out the final document that would change everything. On March 15th, 6 months before her death, Grandmother Mildred met privately with attorney Samuel Richardson in Boulder. She executed a new will that completely revoked all previous versions, Tyler grabbed the document with shaking hands, his accountant's eye quickly scanning the legal language. "This can't be right," he whispered. "According to the new will," I continued, "Grandmother left her entire estate to me. The house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, the life insurance proceeds, everything. All of you were explicitly disinherited for failure to provide genuine care and emotional support." Mom let out a strangled sob. She knew. She knew what we were doing. "Not exactly," I said. "She suspected financial irregularities, but the will change wasn't about the theft. Attorney Richardson's notes show that Grandmother was hurt by how little genuine affection the family showed her. She felt used and neglected." I pulled out copies of Grandmother's handwritten notes from her meetings with the attorney. She wrote, "They only visit when they need something. They talk about me like I'm not there. Suzette is the only one who calls just to check on me, who remembers my stories, who treats me like a person instead of a burden." The emotional impact of those words was devastating. Dad put his head in his hands, finally understanding what they had lost through their selfishness and greed. "So everything you stole," I continued, "was already mine legally. You committed federal crimes to take money that belonged to me anyway." Marcus sank back into his chair, the fight completely gone out of him. 5 years. 5 years of planning and stealing and living in fear of those criminals, and it was all for nothing. "Not for nothing," I corrected. "It was for worse than nothing. Because now, instead of simply being disappointed by your lack of love, Grandmother died believing her family was stealing from her. You turned her final months into a nightmare of confusion and betrayal." Brenda was crying harder now, grieving not just for her legal troubles but for the relationship with Grandmother that could never be repaired. "What happens now?" Tyler asked quietly. "That depends on your choices," I replied. "The restitution offer stands for everyone except Marcus. Agent Rodriguez expects an answer within 72 hours. Over the following 2 months, the consequences of that Christmas dinner played out exactly as I had predicted. Tyler, Janet, Robert, and Brenda all accepted the restitution agreement and began cooperating with the federal investigation. They sold assets, established payment plans, and provided detailed testimony about Marcus's gambling creditors. Marcus chose to fight the charges and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison after a brief trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury took less than 3 hours to convict him on all counts of wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy. Tyler's CPA license was suspended for 3 years, but he avoided prison time in exchange for his cooperation. He found work as a bookkeeper while making restitution payments and slowly rebuilding his professional reputation. My parents were forced to sell their house and downsize to a small apartment. The financial strain was significant, but they avoided federal prison and began attending counseling to address their relationship with money and family dynamics. Brenda divorced Marcus while he was awaiting sentencing. With assistance from victim advocacy services, she relocated to a different state with protective custody support and started over with her children. The organized crime investigation led to federal indictments against Vincent Carlucci, Tommy Santos, and 12 other members of their loan sharking operation. The case became a major victory for federal prosecutors combating financial crimes against elderly victims. As for me, I used Grandmother Mildred's inheritance to establish the Mildred Henderson Foundation for Elder Financial Protection. The foundation provides free legal advocacy for elderly victims of financial abuse, funds investigations into suspected fraud, and educates families about recognizing and preventing elder financial crimes. The foundation's first case involved helping an 87-year-old man whose son had stolen his Social Security benefits to buy drugs. Our second case exposed a nursing home administrator who was embezzling from residents' personal accounts. Within the first year, we recovered over $800,000 for elderly victims and helped prosecute 17 cases of financial abuse. Mrs. Patterson became an unexpected ally and surrogate grandmother figure. She joined the foundation's advisory board and helped develop educational programs for neighborhood watch groups. Her teacher's instincts and community connections made her invaluable in identifying at-risk seniors and suspicious family dynamics. 1 year after that devastating Christmas dinner, I hosted my own holiday celebration. Instead of family members who saw me as competition for inheritance money, I gathered close friends who valued genuine relationships. Sarah, from my marketing team, her husband David and their twin daughters, my neighbor Carlos and his elderly mother Rosa, who reminded me so much of Grandmother Mildred. Mrs. Patterson, of course, bringing her famous snickerdoodles and stories about the old neighborhood. We sat around a table set with grandmother's china, sharing food and laughter and honest conversation. No one was calculating the value of the dishes or planning how to steal from the others. No one felt entitled to anything beyond friendship and respect. During dinner, Mrs. Patterson raised a toast with grandmother's crystal wine glasses. "To Mildred Henderson," she said, "who taught us that real family is made of people who choose to love and protect each other." As I looked around that table of chosen family, I felt a peace that had eluded me for years. The legal battles were over. Justice had been served. The criminals were facing consequences, and the victims were being compensated. But more importantly, I had learned to value myself enough to walk away from relationships built on manipulation and entitlement. I had found the courage to fight for what was right, even when it meant confronting people who claimed to love me. Grandmother's final gift wasn't just the financial inheritance. It was the example she set by changing her will when she realized the truth about her family's character. She showed me that love without respect is worthless, and that family loyalty cannot excuse criminal behavior. The foundation continues to grow, helping more elderly victims every month. Each case reminds me why grandmother's story mattered, and why justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes people ask if I regret destroying my relationship with my birth family. The answer is simple. They destroyed those relationships themselves when they chose crime over character. I simply refused to be an accomplice to their choices. On quiet evenings, I still visit grandmother's house, which is now the foundation's headquarters. I sit in her favorite chair and remember her stories, her wisdom, and her unconditional love. She would be proud of how her inheritance is being used to protect other vulnerable seniors. The most important lesson I learned is that true strength comes not from avoiding conflict, but from standing up for what's right regardless of the personal cost. Family should be a source of love and support, but when family members choose to become predators, you have a responsibility to protect the innocent and seek justice. Elder financial abuse destroys more than bank accounts. It destroys trust, dignity, and the fundamental safety that every senior deserves. When we fail to prosecute these crimes, we tell criminals that elderly victims don't matter. Grandmother Mildred mattered. Every elderly person facing financial abuse matters. And sometimes, seeking justice for those who cannot protect themselves is the most loving thing you can do. The Foundation's motto, engraved on a plaque in our lobby, captures this truth perfectly. Real families protect each other. False families prey on each other. Know the difference. That Christmas dinner taught me to know the difference. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? How do you think you would handle discovering that people you trusted were committing crimes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart. Subscribe for more stories about standing up for justice, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that they're strong enough to fight back against abuse. Thank you for listening to Grandmother Mildred's story, and remember that you deserve relationships built on love and respect, not fear and manipulation. Stay strong, and know that justice is always worth fighting for.